Someone asks you for a favor. You're exhausted. You have no time. You really don't want to do it. But instead of saying no, you hear yourself say, "Sure, no problem." And immediately you feel it, that wave of resentment, frustration at them for asking, but mostly frustration at yourself for saying yes, again. Or maybe you do say no, and then the guilt hits like a truck. You feel selfish, mean, like you've done something wrong by simply having limits. Here's the truth. If setting boundaries makes you feel guilty, it's not because boundaries are wrong, it's because somewhere along the way, you learned that your needs don't matter as much as other people's comfort. Today, we're breaking down exactly why boundaries trigger guilt, where that guilt comes from, and most importantly, how to set boundaries without drowning in shame. Let's start with what's really happening in your brain when you try to say no. First, let's define what we're talking about. A boundary is simply a limit you set to protect your time, energy, emotional well-being, or physical space. That's it. Boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're guidelines for how you want to be treated. Boundaries sound like, "I can't take on extra projects right now. I need some alone time this weekend. Please don't call me after 9 p.m. I'm not comfortable discussing that topic. I can help for an hour, but not all day." In healthy relationships, boundaries are respected. The other person might be disappointed, but they understand. They don't punish you, guilt trip you, or make you feel like a terrible person for having needs. But here's where it gets complicated. Many of us didn't grow up in environments where boundaries were modeled or accepted. If your boundaries were ignored, violated, or punished when you were young, your nervous system learned something dangerous. Having needs is unsafe. Protecting myself makes people angry. I need to prioritize others' feelings over my own to be loved. That's why, as an adult, setting a simple boundary can feel like you're committing a crime. Your guilt isn't proof that boundaries are selfish. It's proof that you were trained to feel guilty for having them. Reason number 1. You feel guilty setting boundaries. You learned early that love and approval were conditional on your compliance. Think back to your childhood. What happened when you said no? When you didn't want to hug a relative? When you wanted privacy? When you expressed anger or disappointment? For many people, boundaries were met with withdrawal of affection. Fine, I guess you don't love me then. Anger or punishment. How dare you be so disrespectful? Guilt tripping. After everything I've done for you. Being told you're selfish, ungrateful, or bad. When this happens repeatedly, your developing brain makes a logical connection. My boundaries cause people to reject me. Therefore, to be loved, I must have no boundaries. This becomes a core belief. And core beliefs don't just disappear when you become an adult. They operate in the background, driving your behavior without you even realizing it. So now, as an adult, when you try to set a boundary, your nervous system sounds the alarm. Danger. If you say no, they'll leave. You'll be alone. You'll be unlovable. The guilt you feel isn't actually about the boundary itself. It's an emotional flashback. Your nervous system reliving old fears of abandonment or rejection. The antidote? Recognize where this came from. When guilt shows up, ask yourself, am I responding to the current situation or to old programming? Here's what you need to know. Relationships that require you to have no boundaries aren't safe relationships. Real love can handle you having limits. If someone withdraws care because you set a boundary, that tells you about their capacity, not your worth. Reason number 2. You've internalized the belief that having needs is selfish, and selfishness is morally wrong. Let's be clear. There's a difference between healthy self-care and actual selfishness. Actual selfishness, taking without regard for others, exploiting people, refusing to contribute or reciprocate, only considering your own needs at others' expense. Healthy boundaries, recognizing your limits, saying no to things that deplete you, preserving energy for things that matter to you, expecting basic respect. But many of us, especially women, eldest children, and people raised in dysfunctional families, were taught that any form of self-prioritization is selfish. You were taught to be selfless, not self-aware, accommodating, not assertive, giving, not receiving, small, not space-taking. This is called parentification or caretaking conditioning. You learn that your value lies in how much you give, how useful you are, how little you ask for. And now, even thinking about setting a boundary triggers that voice. You're being selfish. You're being difficult. Who do you think you are? But here's the thing. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't be there for others if you're depleted. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're what allow you to show up as your best self. When you set boundaries, you're not abandoning people. You're creating sustainable relationships where you don't end up burned out and resentful. Think about it. Would you rather have someone show up for you genuinely or begrudgingly? Boundaries make authentic connection possible. Reason number 3. You associate boundaries with conflict, and you'll do anything to avoid conflict. Setting a boundary often means disappointing someone. They wanted something from you, and you're saying no. That creates tension. And if you grew up in an environment where conflict was explosive, unpredictable, or dangerous, your nervous system learned. Tension equals threat. Maybe conflict in your family meant screaming, violence, or days of cold silence. Maybe expressing disagreement was met with punishment or emotional retaliation. Maybe you were the peacekeeper, the one who had to manage everyone else's emotions. So you learned to avoid it at all costs. You learned to smooth things over, agree, accommodate, and never, ever rock the boat. The problem? Boundaries sometimes rock the boat. Healthy boundaries might create temporary discomfort. And your nervous system interprets that discomfort as existential danger. Here's what you need to understand. Discomfort is not the same as danger. Someone being disappointed is not the same as someone being harmed. In healthy relationships, people can tolerate disappointment. They can hear no without retaliating. They can feel frustrated without making you responsible for fixing their feelings. Healthy response to a boundary. I'm disappointed, but I understand you need to take care of yourself. Unhealthy response. Wow, I can't believe you're being so selfish. I guess I know where I stand now. The second response. That's manipulation. That's someone trying to punish you for having limits. If someone consistently responds to your boundaries with guilt, trips, anger, or withdrawal, that's not conflict. That's control. And it's not your job to manage their reactions. You can set boundaries kindly, but you can't set them without potentially creating discomfort. And that's okay. The discomfort of setting a boundary is temporary. The resentment of never setting boundaries lasts forever. Reason number 4, you believe you're responsible for how other people feel. Someone is disappointed by your boundary, and you immediately feel like you've done something wrong. You feel responsible for fixing their disappointment, managing their frustration, or preventing their sadness. But here's the truth. Adults are responsible for their own emotional regulation. You can care about someone's feelings without being responsible for them. Let's break this down. Caring about someone's feelings. I understand you're disappointed, and I care about that. Being responsible for someone's feelings. You're disappointed, so I need to change my boundary to make you feel better. The first is empathy. The second is codependency. When you set a boundary and someone reacts emotionally, your job is not to fix their reaction. Your job is to hold your boundary while still being compassionate. This might sound like, I understand you're frustrated, and that makes sense. I still can't do what you're asking. I care about you, and I'm not available this weekend. I hear that you're disappointed. My answer is still no. You can be kind and have boundaries. You can care about people and still say no. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Here's how to tell the difference between someone who's genuinely disappointed and someone who's manipulating you. A person who's genuinely disappointed will process their feelings and respect your boundary. A person who's manipulating you will keep pushing, guilt-tripping, and making their emotional state your responsibility. If someone says, "If you really cared about me, you'd do this," that's manipulation. Real care doesn't require you to sacrifice your well-being. So, how do you actually stop feeling guilty? Here are 5 strategies that work. Strategy number 1. Reframe what boundaries are. Stop thinking of boundaries as selfish acts and start seeing them as relationship-preserving acts. Boundaries prevent resentment, which means they actually protect your relationships. Remind yourself, this boundary allows me to show up authentically, not resentfully. Strategy number 2. Practice the "and" statement. When guilt shows up, don't fight it. Acknowledge it and move forward anyway. I feel guilty, and this boundary is necessary. I care about this person, and I can't do what they're asking. This feels uncomfortable, and I'm doing it anyway. You're not waiting for the guilt to disappear before you set boundaries. You're feeling the guilt and setting the boundary anyway. Strategy number 3. Start with low-stakes boundaries. Don't start by setting major boundaries with your most difficult relationships. Start small. Order what you actually want at a restaurant, not what you think others want you to order. Say no thank you to an invitation without over-explaining. Leave a conversation when you need to, even if it seems abrupt. Ask for what you need in a minor situation. Think of boundary setting like a muscle. You don't start by deadlifting 300 pounds. You start light and build up. Each small boundary you set teaches your nervous system, I can do this. Nothing terrible happened. I'm still safe. I'm still loved. Strategy number 4. Notice whose voices are in your head. When guilt shows up, get curious. Whose voice is telling you that you're selfish? Your critical parent? A past partner? A religious teaching? A cultural expectation? Often, the guilt voice isn't even yours. It's internalized criticism from others. Once you identify whose voice it is, you can respond to it. That's my mother's voice, not mine. I'm an adult now. I get to decide what's selfish and what's not. Strategy number 5. Find evidence that boundaries don't destroy relationships. Your brain is predicting disaster. If I set this boundary, they'll hate me. They'll leave. I'll be alone. Test that prediction. Set a boundary and see what actually happens. Most of the time, you'll find that healthy people respect your boundary. They might be disappointed, but they don't punish you or withdraw love. And if they do withdraw, that tells you something important. They were only in relationship with the version of you that had no needs. That's not love. That's conditional acceptance. Boundaries don't destroy healthy relationships. They reveal unhealthy ones. Let's get practical. Here are boundary scripts you can actually use. When someone asks for your time, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm not available. When someone pushes after you've said no, I understand you're disappointed. My answer is still no. When someone guilt trips you, I hear that you're upset. I'm still not able to do that. When you need to leave or end a conversation, I need to go now. We can continue this later. When someone asks why, it just doesn't work for me right now. When you need emotional space, I need some time to myself. I'll reach out when I'm ready. Notice what these scripts don't include. Long explanations, apologies, or justifications. Over-explaining weakens your boundary. It signals that you're looking for permission or trying to convince them your boundary is valid. You don't need permission to have boundaries. Here's your new mantra. I don't owe anyone access to me just because they want it. Here's what I need you to understand. The guilt you feel when setting boundaries is not evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that you're doing something different. You're breaking old patterns. You're choosing yourself. You're refusing to stay small to keep others comfortable. That feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels like guilt. But guilt is not your compass. Guilt is just an emotion, a learned response from a time when boundaries weren't safe. You get to decide whether that guilt is still serving you, or whether it's time to set it down. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries. They'll adjust, they'll understand, and they'll stay. The people who don't respect your boundaries, they're showing you who they are. Believe them. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish, difficult, or mean. It makes you honest. It makes you healthy. It makes you someone who knows their worth. You deserve relationships where you don't have to shrink yourself to be loved. Remember, this video is for educational purposes and isn't a substitute for professional mental health support. If you're struggling with boundaries in abusive or toxic relationships, please reach out to a therapist. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing. We talk about mental health and psychology in ways that actually make sense. Take care of yourself. Your needs matter just as much as anyone else's.